A lot has changed in parish life in a quarter century, yet American Catholics are still predominantly attached to territorial parishes headed by a priest-pastor. The model is being stretched and transformed, however, by tremendous demographic changes in the Catholic population, and church leaders are struggling to keep up. In the years since we began this series on American Catholic laity, the Catholic population in the United States has increased by more than a fifth. It continues to grow at about 1% per year, and even conservative estimates project that Catholics will top 100 million by the middle of the 21st century. At the same time that the numbers of Catholics have been growing, the numbers of priests and sisters who provided the bulk of parish ministry in 1987 continue to decline. This places additional pressure on parish life, which revolves around the sacraments and requires a priest for most of them. In 1987, when we began this series, there were about 1,000 parish-identified Catholics for every priest. In 2011, there are more than 1,600 per priest, an increase of more than 60%. The numbers of priests serving in the United States has declined by a quarter since 1987, and the number of religious sisters has been cut in half. This shortfall has been compensated to some extent by an increase in the number of permanent deacons and lay ecclesial ministers who are serving in parishes. Both of these leadership positions were relatively new in 1987, but are increasingly an accepted part of parish life today. Catholics are also more dispersed geographically than they were in 1987, continuing a late 20th century pattern of movement out of the inner cities and into the suburbs, out of the traditional Catholic strongholds in the Northeast and the upper Midwest, and into the rapidly growing Sunbelt cities in the South and the Southwest. And if you look at the map here, this is a map of Catholic population by diocese, and just change in the last 10 years. And you can see the red areas are areas of population decline, severe decline. The yellow areas are areas of relatively more modest decline. And then the green to dark green areas are areas of growth in Catholic population within the dioceses. So you can see the movement out of the Northeast and the Midwest and into the Sun Belt and the West. And what ends up happening is that Catholics are now pretty much equally distributed across the country. And out, still in the Northeast in large numbers, but out of the inner cities, the urban ethnic congregations where they used to be, and into the suburbs. So even though there's still a significant population in the Northeast, they don't live where Catholics used to live. In 1987, there were about 19,600 parishes for 54 million Catholics, or about 2,700 Catholics per parish. By 2011, the total number of parishes had been reduced to about 17,800, a net decline of more than 7% in 25 years. Even though most of the parish mergers and closures occurred in the Northeast and the upper Midwest, in areas that have lost Catholic population, there's been no corresponding increase in new parishes in the areas of the country that are experiencing the most growth. And thus, the ratio nationally now is more than 3,600 Catholics per parish. The Catholic population is becoming more culturally and linguistically diverse as well, influenced by immigration from predominantly Catholic countries around the world. The Catholic countries that we're experiencing the most concretely are obviously Hispanic population. This map of Hispanic population in dioceses across the United States shows that Hispanics are concentrated in many of the areas that have seen rapid growth in Catholic population, particularly in the East Coast cities, in Florida, and in the Southwest. So you have not only migration of Catholics, of native-born Catholics out of the traditional immigrant neighborhoods and moving into the South and the West, but you also have large population of Hispanic Catholics from South America and Latin America also moving in and moving into some of the same areas, so it's an increased concentration there. About 2/3 of Hispanics are Catholic, and this growth is changing the face of Catholicism in the United States. And in this slide, we can see the effect of this increased Hispanic presence on the composition of the Catholic Church in the United States. This is the racial and ethnic distribution within each generation. This is the same generations that Bill was describing. But for each bar, you can see how each generation distributes according to race and ethnicity. I'm comparing from the 2005 survey to the 2011 survey to show you how this change in Catholic population ethnicity is taking place. Not only are the two younger generations much more diverse than the older two, but remember, they also make up well over half, about 57% of all adult Catholics today. Those are not equal bars, in other words. In terms of attitudes about parish life and parish leaders, in general, we see that from the trends that Catholics remain attached to parish life. Most Catholics disagree that Catholic parishes are too big and impersonal, despite the fact that half of all parishes today have more than 750 Catholics attending over the course of a typical weekend. Catholics still feel strongly that parish priests are doing a good job. 9 in 10 say, on the whole, parish priests do a good job. We do see, however, some increasing signs of discontent with parish leadership. Despite the fact that opportunities for lay leadership have increased as parishes get larger and more complex, lay Catholics seem somewhat reluctant to step up to the plate. 10 years ago, when we first asked the question, less than half of lay Catholics, 44%, agreed with the statement, most priests don't expect the laity to be leaders, just followers. That means that most Catholics disagreed with that statement. Today, about 6 in 10 agree with that statement. That sentiment is reinforced by a new question that we asked for the first time in 2011. 2/3 of lay Catholics agree that most Catholics don't want to take on leadership roles in their parish. That's disturbing to me as a former lay leader in my parish. Let's look at some of the attitudes about parish leadership in light of the reality of fewer priests in parish ministry. As the number of priests available to pastor a parish declines and the Catholic population moves away from traditional Catholic neighborhoods, bishops are exploring a variety of options to reorganize parish life and ministry. We asked Catholics about several of these alternatives, and we find that their attitudes about each alternative remain quite consistent over time. The 3 most acceptable alternatives among lay Catholics include sharing a priest with one or more other parish. Those are called oftentimes clustered parishes or twin parishes or yoked or linked, where one priest ministers in more than one parish. The second most acceptable alternative is merging 2 or more nearby parishes into one parish. And equally acceptable is bringing in another priest from another country to lead the parish. This is the phenomenon of international priests that we're beginning to see emerge in the United States. Each of these three alternatives is at least somewhat acceptable to about 9 in 10 lay Catholics. There is another alternative that's spelled out in canon law that allows a bishop to entrust a share in the exercise of the pastoral care of a parish to a deacon or some other person who's not a priest. In practice, this means that the bishop appoints a deacon, a religious, or a lay person to assume the day-to-day administrative and pastoral responsibilities for a parish, with one or more priests who often are in residence at another parish to handle the sacramental and canonical responsibilities for the parish. So there's oftentimes a lay person that pretty much runs the parish, but then priests come in on the weekends for Mass and for other sacraments. This is a difficult concept to explain, though, in just a few words on a survey question. And when we phrase that option as not having a resident priest in the parish, but only a lay parish administrator and visiting priests, no more than about half of lay Catholics found that alternative even somewhat acceptable. However, when we rephrased the question in 2011, we asked instead, having a deacon or lay person run the parish with visiting priests for sacraments. When we asked the question that way, 3 in 4 lay Catholics said that would be at least somewhat acceptable. Most would also find it at least somewhat acceptable to reduce the number of weekend masses or to have a communion service instead of a mass some of the time. Most Catholics would not find it even somewhat acceptable to reduce the number of masses at the parish to less than once a week. That means on some Sundays you wouldn't have Mass at that parish. And only about a third agree that closing the parish is even somewhat acceptable. Now, these are both alternatives that the bishops are using in some cases, in some areas, when there's too few priests to go around. Finally, about 4 in 10 would find it at least somewhat acceptable if there was no priest available for visiting the sick. After all, that's a ministry that can be performed by a lay person or a deacon. But not having a priest available for administering the last rites for the dying is not at all acceptable for 3 in 4 lay Catholics. Those are attitudes about parish life. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the other major institution that is intrinsic to Catholic life, and that's Catholic education. In general, we find that pre-Vatican II Catholics had relatively good access to Catholic education. About 4 in 10 attended a Catholic elementary school, about 1 in 4 attended a Catholic high school, and 1 in 10 attended a Catholic college, roughly. Likewise, Vatican II Catholics also had good access to Catholic schools. Half of that generation attended a Catholic elementary school, about a quarter attended a Catholic high school, and about 1 in 10 attended a Catholic college or university. Post-Vatican II and millennial Catholics, however, are less likely than the generations that preceded them to have attended a Catholic elementary school. They would have been in elementary school in the 1980s and the 1990s, during a time of immense social and economic change. Their parents were among the many Catholic families that had moved out of the cities and into the suburbs, out of the Rust Belt and into the Sun Belt. They were learning firsthand that building new Catholic schools to meet the demand for young families was prohibitively expensive. Instead, many of them opted for a more readily available and less expensive public school, combined with parish-based religious education. These two generations were also a little less likely to attend a Catholic high school, although the difference between the two older generations is within the margin of error. And there's no difference in the likelihood of attending a Catholic college or university. In the 2011 survey, for the first time, we have enough millennials as well as enough Hispanic Catholics to measure how access to Catholic education has affected those two groups. And as we can see here in this slide, if you compare the group on the left, which is non-Hispanic Catholics, to the group on the right, Hispanic Catholics, you can see that Hispanic Catholics of any generation are never more than half as likely as the corresponding non-Hispanic generations of that Hispanic Catholics of that same generation to have attended a Catholic school at any level. We don't have enough pre-Vatican II Hispanic Catholics in the survey to report on them. But if you look at Vatican II Catholics, for example, 28% of Hispanic Catholics in the Vatican II generation attended a Catholic elementary school compared to 54% among non-Hispanic Catholics. That's the comparison that I'm asking you to make there. And it holds across all the generations and all the levels of schooling. So what is going on here? I am asserting that it's demographics that's making a difference in this access to schooling. What you see here in this map is the change in Catholic population by county across the last half of the 20th century. The orange and brown here are counties that were stable or lost Catholic population since 1950. You see some of the same patterns going on that were in the previous map. The counties in yellow to dark green had growth over the last half of the 20th century in their Catholic population. So again, you can see the elementary schools are concentrated. The elementary schools are those little green dots there, and they're concentrated in the population centers of the Northeast and the Midwest, where Catholics had been concentrated. Those schools have been closing as the Catholic population moves out of those areas, and elementary schools, as the Catholic population moves out of those areas and leaves their institutions behind. They did the same thing with the schools that they did with the parishes. They left, but they didn't bring the institutions with them. You can't pick up a building and move it so easily, although it does happen. In fact, there's a fantastic story about a gorgeous parish in Buffalo that was disassembled brick by brick and moved physically to Atlanta and rebuilt. It doesn't happen often, and I'm sure it's very expensive. They didn't do that with the schools either. So what happens is that just since the 2005 survey, we're talking here just 6 years ago, Catholic elementary schools have declined by 10%, from 6,386 to 5,774. There's been no corresponding change in the numbers of Catholic high schools. There's still about 1,200 across the country. Access also affects schooling. This mismatch between the institution and the population means that many Catholic schools in areas of growing population have waiting lists. Waiting lists for Catholic schooling have a short shelf life, though. You can't expect parents to leave their children on a waiting list for more than a year or two. That's just unrealistic. If there's little expectation that an opening will appear, they will seek other alternatives for the education of their children. And that, I would assert, is what's been happening. You can see here, if you look at particularly at the southeast and the west, far west, 30 to 40% of all Catholic schools in those areas have waiting lists. So what difference does it make if you've attended a Catholic school? Does it make a difference? Here we take a look at some outcomes to see whether or not Catholic education makes a difference. And again, I have non-Hispanics on the left and Hispanics on the right. What we see in the data is that for non-Hispanics, having attended a Catholic elementary school is not associated with graduating from college or achieving a household income of $75,000 or more. So if you look at, did you attend a Catholic elementary school? Yes or no? 40% of those that attended a Catholic elementary school graduated from college, 30% did not. If you attended a Catholic elementary school, a Catholic high school, 43% graduated from college, 31% who did not attend a Catholic high school graduated from college. That's only a very modest correlation there. The same thing for household income. There's no difference whether or not you attended a Catholic elementary school for non-Hispanics and the likelihood of earning over $75,000 a year. Among Hispanic Catholics, however, if you look at the right-hand side, there is a stronger association between Catholic schooling and socioeconomic success. So Hispanics who attended a Catholic elementary school are twice as likely as those who did not to have graduated college. They're also twice as likely to have earned a household income of $75,000 or more. Similar statistics for those who attended a Catholic high school, more than twice as likely to be a college graduate or to have a household income of $75,000 or more. 3 times as likely if they attended a Catholic high school to have an income of over $75,000. Now, we're not suggesting that Catholic schooling causes success in later life. That's overly simplistic. Certainly, there are many, many other intervening factors. But these comparisons are worth noting. Catholic schooling does make a difference, particularly for Hispanics. At the same time, does Catholic schooling make a difference in the way Catholics practice their faith and in their attitudes about church? And if so, do these differences also hold for Hispanic Catholics as well as for non-Hispanic Catholics? The data here show that, at least in terms of the way Catholics practice their faith, attending a Catholic high school makes a difference. Actually, these statistics that I'm going to tell you right now I didn't put in the slide, but this is in terms of their practice. Among non-Hispanic Catholics who attended a Catholic high school, 3 in 4 are registered in a parish. So if you attended a Catholic high school, you're more likely to be registered in a parish. Among Hispanics, 7 in 10 of those who attended a Catholic high school are registered in a parish, compared to less than half of those who did not attend. So Hispanics and non-Hispanics, if you attended a Catholic high school, you're more likely to be registered in a parish. Non-Hispanics who attended a Catholic high school are also more likely than those who did not to attend Mass more than monthly, 49% compared to 38%, to pray at least daily, and to rank as highly committed on our scale of commitment to the church. We won't get into that much today, but it showed up in previous books as well. Finally, what I'm showing you here in this slide is that Catholic schooling does make a difference, particularly among non-Hispanics who attended a Catholic high school, in the importance of a number of belief statements about the church. So non-Hispanics who attended a Catholic high school are more likely than those who did not to say that each of the highlighted items there are very important to them as a Catholic. Very important is the response category. Non-Hispanic Catholics who attended a Catholic high school, 88% said Jesus' resurrection from the dead is very important to their Catholic identity, compared to 2/3 of those non-Hispanic Catholics who did not attend Catholic high school. Each of those identity statements is significantly more likely to be very important among those who attended a Catholic high school. Among Hispanics who attended a Catholic high school, they are more likely than those who did not to say that the sacraments, such as the Eucharist, and the Church's involvement in social justice are very important to them as a Catholic. They're less likely than Hispanics who did not attend a Catholic high school to say that the teaching authority of the Vatican is very important to them as a Catholic. So there's somewhat fewer of significant effects among Hispanic Catholics, but remember, Hispanic Catholics have very little access to Catholic high school. Catholic schools are less available now than they were 50 years ago, and fewer Catholics are sending their children to a Catholic school. In fact, Catholics remain conflicted about their value, expense, necessity, and efficacy. Nevertheless, the data show that attending a Catholic high school does make a difference in many aspects of Catholic identity and practice. For Hispanics in particular, Catholic schooling can also make a difference in terms of socioeconomic success. Thank you.